We're seeing how political fault lines are being redrawn in Britain after that Brexit vote. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We are in the company of former Conservative MP Louise Mensch of news website Heat Street, who is with us from New York City. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to journalist Alex Taylor, Jeremy Stubbs, president of the British Conservatives in Paris, and Steve Keen, the author of Debunking Economics, who teaches at Kingston University. Before all the drama that's unfolded this Thursday, YouGov putting out a first snap poll to see who had the best chance of winning the Conservative Party leadership. And yes, Theresa May, a discreet supporter of Remain, who was well in the lead there, making the case for keeping the Tories at number 10.
With the Labour Party tearing itself to pieces and divisive nationalists in Scotland and Wales, it is nothing less than the patriotic duty of our party to unite and govern in the best interests of the whole country. We need a bold, new, positive vision for the future of our country, a vision of a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us.
Alex Taylor, the argument there, you have a Labour Party in disarray. We'll talk about that in a moment. That's the problems with the Scottish nationalists. You've got to keep the Conservatives where they are.
The whole country is in disarray, and simply because of an argument that went on within the Conservative Party. I think we ought to remind ourselves why we've got this referendum in the first place. It was David Cameron's get-out-of-jail card for one particular week when all of a sudden he couldn't stand his Europhobic the half of his party were anti-European, getting on him with the rise of UKIP and so forth. He said, oh, OK, well, I promise you, if I'm re-elected again, we'll have a referendum. Probably thinking, because all the polls said that he was going to be in a coalition again with the very pro-European Liberal Democrats, who he could rely on to say, no referendum. And up until the very last minute, all the polls, even the BBC poll at the general election a year ago, thought that the Conservatives weren't going to get an absolute majority. So all of a sudden, he finds himself, unfortunately, obliged to do this referendum, which I don't think he wanted. I mean, when you see that it's led to the downfall of his career, it's precipitated the whole country into a political crisis, the like of which we haven't seen since the end of the Second World War. Who knows what's going to happen in the markets? Why did the governor of the Bank of England go live on television about 3 hours ago to try and reassure people? Who knows what's going to happen with this awful political gamble which has gone wrong, which is all to do, my country has been taken out of the biggest market in the world because of internal problems and internal infighting between the two wings of the Conservative Party.
Absolute rubbish. The stock market has regained everything from that little storm in a teacup.
What about the pound?
What about it? A pound that is devalued, as it happened in 1992 when we so rightly came out of the European exchange rate mechanism. We saw a long period of sustained growth. A competitive pound is fantastic for exports. And really, listen to the democracy-phobic commentary you've got sitting at your desk there. We had a referendum. The entire nation voted, and it voted to leave the EU.
The entire nation didn't vote. 48% of people voted to stay. The entire nation didn't vote.
The entire nation voted, sir, and 52 to 48, that is a substantial win for Brexit. I am sorry that you don't like it when the people speak, but the people have spoken.
Well, what about this? Can I put a point to you? Can I just put a point to you? That the main argument, apart from immigration, which I think was shamelessly whipped up by the Leave campaign, the main argument was for parliamentary sovereignty, that we have to get sovereignty back from Brussels. That was the main argument that was put forward. The problem you have is that you have a problem with the Parliament, which at the moment there's about 500 out of 760 or so members of Parliament who wouldn't at all vote for Brexit. Are you going to go against the parliamentary sovereignty? All the arguments are for parliamentary sovereignty. Well, this Parliament isn't going to vote for Brexit.
That is not so. That is not so.
Oh, really? Half your party wasn't for Remain?
And now they, unlike you, have accepted the will of the people. This was a referendum legislated for by the whole Parliament. The people have spoken. Remainers like Theresa May, you just heard her say it. She hears the will of the people. She is now a Remainer for Brexit, like everybody in the Conservative Party.
Is the legitimacy of the members of Parliament dented by the fact that the voters didn't follow what they endorsed?
Oh, it's so annoying when the little people don't listen to their masters, isn't it?
No,
I'm not
suggesting that. I'm asking, is this the case? Is this the case for a snap general election? I'm not.
No, certainly not. We are about to have the Prime Minister remains the Prime Minister. There is stability. The markets have recovered. Now, Theresa May stands no chance of being Prime Minister. None at all. YouGov got this referendum completely wrong. I think we can all agree that the pollsters got this referendum completely wrong, and nobody that is not for a complete Brexit and a complete break is going to be elected to lead the Conservative Party. The pollsters are embarrassing themselves. I don't know when they're going to get a grip on their polling situation.
Steve Keen, let me ask you.
She's delusional.
Steve Keen, let me ask you. Steve Keen.
Yeah.
Should there be a snap general election?
No. I think this is, again, this is the case. The Conservatives are in power. They've called the referendum. Perhaps the leadership didn't want it, but there's no reason to do an exit over this. Again, the case which is made for the catastrophe that would come if we exited was always overblown. And the main determinant of the economic fate of the country are the types of policies that the central bank governor is now doing, plus the government's own capacity to spend to stimulate the economy in an event like this. And as you've seen, the markets are already back up above where they were on Friday. And I've heard all these people make comments about how this is just as bad as 2008. You ask those same people what caused 2008, they won't have an answer for you. So again, this has been, the dangers of leaving have been exaggerated. And that's what I wrote in my Forbes column, that this is relatively minor in the sense of its impact upon the UK. The main thing I see here is a chance to get out of a club which the rules of which mean it's a club that should never have been formed in the first place. And one of the ironies we could have experienced is England could have voted to stay in a club which folded 2 years later because the French leave. And that's the real danger. When somebody inside the Eurozone, I think it's a case of when, not if, when they leave, then you're going to see real catastrophe, real crisis, necessary crisis, I might add. But that's what's going to happen. Brexit is a relatively mild event, and England can weather it fairly effectively.
Jeremy.
And the scale of the damage might be done to us depends upon how badly Brussels decides to negotiate. They can't hold England over a barrel like they did Greece.
Jeremy Stubbs?
That's right.
Yes. Well, I don't think there's any sign here that really France will be leaving in 2 years the European Union. I think overall, though, that the European Union is, my own view, if I were to express it freely, is that it's a sideshow. It's not the real problem today. We've become obsessed with it. It is really yesterday's problem. And we are going to be concerned with how we leave the Union in all its minutiae for several years when we should be doing other things, like worrying about the new technological changes, the power of the big tech companies, possession of raw materials, global supply chains, China. People promise us that all these problems will be easier to resolve when we're outside, but the problem is that we will be distracted by our leaving, and that, I think, is where the risk really lies.
All right, this problem is dividing both the Conservatives and the Labour Party. This Thursday, Jeremy Corbyn, again unfazed by the mass desertions from his shadow cabinet as he kept his speaking engagement at an event to unveil a Labour Party report on anti-Semitism.
My confidence and optimism are not naive. We all know that despite the overwhelming mandate I was given by Labour Party members and supporters last year, we've all had a torrid few days. Well, at least I have. Whatever now takes place in our party, politics should be conducted in a decent manner. When I stood for the leadership last summer, I called for a kinder, gentler politics. Sadly, I have to report that is still work in progress. Some people may equate leadership with nastiness. I disagree. Decency is no disqualification for leadership. In fact, I think it should be a prerequisite.
All right, the previous day in Parliament, the outgoing Prime Minister goaded Corbyn over his refusal to step down as Labour leader.
If he's looking for excuses about why the side he and I were on about the referendum, frankly, he should look somewhere else. And I have to say to the honourable gentleman, he talks about job insecurity and my 2 months to go. It might be in my party's interest for him to sit there. It's not in the national interest. And I would say, for heaven's sake, man, go.
Let me ask you, let me put the question to you, Steve Keen. Is David Cameron right?
No, he's not. I have to respect Jeremy here for having the courage to stand up to being stabbed in the back by all his own colleagues, who actually represent a neoliberal flavour of the Labor Party, which is very similar to the policies the Tories themselves carried out beforehand, when he has been sceptical, and rightly sceptical, about the euro all the way through. He did campaign, he went along with the party solidarity, unlike his own party, I might add. The vote didn't go his way, he's correct. He
campaigned, I'm sorry, he didn't campaign very hard. He even went on a big vacation at one point. We really only saw him in the waning days of that campaign.
Yeah, I think, in fact, there's a Guardian article you may have seen from June 13 saying that the group and the party who were trying to get rid of him were planning to run a campaign of collective resignations after the Brexit vote, when they expected to be a Brexit Remain vote, to criticise them for not campaigning hard enough. Of course, they're now doing the same thing when it's been a Brexit succeeding. So I think this has all been pre-orchestrated. And again, to be able to stand up in that as a decent human being, despite the vitriol that's being thrown from him behind, I think is quite an impressive mark of his character.
Alex Taylor, can Jeremy Corbyn hang on?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, absolutely everybody's left him. Everybody who supported him has left his shadow cabinet. I mean, I'm kind of like in between here, so I can criticise the Labour Party just as much as the Conservative Party. I think it's a disaster for British democracy that there's no coherent opposition. It's obvious that anybody that Jeremy
Because there's talk of a split. Like there had been, what was it, in the 1980s, a split within the Labour Party, within the left.
Yes, split into the Social Democrats. I think that there's a big hole, there's a huge vacuum in British politics at the moment, because once of all, despite what Louise Mensch was rather unpleasantly crying about the victory, there are still 48% of British people, and probably a lot more, who regret, if you look at all the social media at the moment, having voted for staying in the European Union. Who represents them at the moment? You'd have certainly not the Conservative Party, which is going to take us out of the European Union, certainly not the Labour Party, which doesn't have any positive European sense at all. I think that one of the huge problems you're going to have more and more is the divide, not between left and right, but between old and young. An awful lot of young people are extremely peeved that the Leave campaign have taken away, for example, freedom of movement. They won't be. I always find it very, very fascinating that, for example, we've just heard how easy it's going to be, to do trade with the rest of Europe, to go and study, for example, in the rest of Europe. It's not. It's not easy. If you're not in the European Union, ask a Swiss person how easy it is for them to be on the Erasmus programme since that they withdrew from it. Ask them how easy it is to ask Americans how easy it is to live, to work in the rest of the European Union. We've just come out of this huge market. We've deprived whole generations of young people of things that I have been able to do. I've been so lucky. I've been a European citizen. I've been able to do this as a British person living in France.
Nonsense.
They've deprived young people from doing that. I promise you, I live in Paris. If you're not in the European Union, it's impossible to get a job. You can't get a job. You can't even get a flat. My best friend is American. She has to pretend that it's her boyfriend, who's French, who is on the lease of the flat, to live there. You can't do this unless you're in the European Union. We've deprived whole generations, and they're very angry, and there's nobody to represent this. I know what I'm talking about. You can say, what nonsense? You're living in New York. You obviously don't know anything about it.
You have been living in France. I had a vote.
Well, lucky
I
you.
was on
Lucky
the
you if you
register,
had a vote, even if you were in New York. Lucky you if you had a vote.
European Union. I went and I voted in Oundle to leave the European Union. You didn't, and yet you've been living in France all this time and haven't applied.
I wasn't
for
allowed
residency.
to. I would have taken the very first European. What are you saying? You didn't vote. I wasn't allowed to vote. I didn't have the right to vote.
You didn't vote.
I would have loved to have voted. I would have given my right arm to have voted.
You have no right. You have lived away for too long. And I suggest that you apply for residency in France. And if I were France, I'd be asking myself why you haven't applied to be a citizen thus far.
No, that wasn't the deal, because we live in the European Union.
And did not vote In this referendum, the statistics say that young people had the lowest turnout of any group. They couldn't be bothered. If they were for the EU, which they were definitively not, they should have showed up at the ballot box.
Louise Mensch, would you make that same argument to pensioners who live in Spain and
France.
Portugal?
Certainly, it's a democracy. It's
So
a
they
democracy.
should-
By the way, they probably did vote. They probably did vote because they will have got their postal vote sorted
It's
out.
unlikely
and
that they
acted
voted because the 15-year
the
rule would have
ageism
prevented
of
them from.
Remain
Anyone
is genuinely
aged
disgusting.
is likely to have been abroad
and
for
all
more than
you are
15 years.
hearing is discriminatory comments about old people that actually did the job that young people failed to do. They got themselves to the ballot box, and with the respect that we ought to give people of advanced years and the wisdom that comes with grey hairs, they took us out of the European Union, and we can be very
Lovely use of the word
thankful to
discriminatory
them.
here.
And we might ask about why
That's
that's
right.
happened too,
Your
because
ageism is appalling.
what-
You should be ashamed. Quelle honte.
Well, there's a lot of ageism which is justified because of the level of disenfranchisement that the youth have had as the baby boomers have run global economies. But in this particular
They
case,
had a vote.
it's the
They didn't use it.
grey hairs who've lived in what used to be the industrial zones of England, which have been wiped out through the whole process of globalisation. The deindustrialisation of England's quite stark. And those are the parts of the country which were told 30 and 40 years ago that globalisation might mean a bit like castor oil, tastes bad but it'd be good for you in the long run. They've tasted it, they've seen how it's been bad for them
But
in the long run.
Steve Keen,
and
that's
why
the-
they're
that's
voting
the
against
point
the
a lot
European
of-
Union.
that's
In
the
my
point a
opinion,
lot of
fundamentally,
Remain-
that's the reason.
That's the point of Steve Keen that a lot of Remain campaigners have said, that these areas like the north of England, like Wales, where there's a core Labour electorate that voted for leaving the EU, they were blaming Brussels for austerity imposed at Westminster.
It isn't just austerity that's had a factor here. It's also been the whole argument that we can have a post-industrial society, a services economy. As I've often said, there is such a thing as a post-industrial society. It's called hunting and gathering. Now, unfortunately, we've seen this process of believing you can have a post-industrial culture mean that all the wealth has been concentrated in the city, and the industrial strength of England it used to have has been more than decimated in the industrial regions like Sheffield. Now, that is a process which the grey hairs have seen themselves in their own eyes, whereas the youth haven't witnessed it. They're still at the beginning stage of this, and the England which has no industry is the England in which they were born. I can understand why the old voters voted for exit, given what the leaders led them into in the last 40 years.
Jeremy
And
Stubb-
Labour voted for exit. They did
Well,
not
I
like
think
the
that,
migrants coming in and taking their
If the
jobs.
Leave campaign has taught us anything at all, it is that the views of economists can safely be ignored.
But I was going to
Yes,
ask you
indeed.
on this point, both the Conservatives and the Labour Party, will it be the same scenarios here in France where with rage at elites, rage at globalization, those votes will all be going to UKIP as the way they've gone to the National Front in this country?
Well, there is a certain amount of rage around, but I think you'll find that after a certain outpouring of rage, people are going to calm down now. They've had enough of this. Just listening to the conversation tonight, it's a largely pointless conversation, although brilliantly chaired, if I may say so, Francois, which we will soon forget because we're very soon going to be in a very different world. And many of these recriminations will be out of date. We've got to go forward and find a solution. And I think that there's a lot of danger ahead, but we've got to believe that a solution can be found for all of us, whatever city we happen to live in right now.
Alex Taylor?
I totally agree that a lot of people who have been having a hard time with globalisation voted for out. But the problem is they were lied to, and what have they got instead? What have they got? They've got a more right-wing government, which I'm sorry is not going to defend their rights more than Cameron's one. Cameron is quite centrist. I mean, if you read the articles by Boris Johnson, who was in the running, and Michael Gove, there's no guarantee that they're going to keep the National Health Service. Their pensions with the pound in three hours. When Brexit went down to its lowest level for 30 years. You can laugh, but this is true. My mother is worried out of her mind by what's going on at the moment.
Louise Mensch, I find
it's very well for you in New
finished.
York to sit there laughing, but my
finished.
mother is absolutely petrified about the state
Did
of the
you see
economy
the
since you
FTSE?
won.
Have you seen the FTSE 100, the FTSE 250,
Have you seen the pound?
FTSE 350?
Have you seen the pound?
That's terrific. A low pound equals good exports. We are going to
But who with? We're coming out of the single market. It's going to take us at least 8 or 9 years.
Terrific.
Well, it's going to take us a long time, and it's all very well for you to say this.
We're going to strike a trade deal with the United States.
Yeah,
it's all very well for you to say this, but I'm
talking about pensioners who are very worried.
We, Britain, are going to strike a trade deal with the United States. Pensioners, sir, voted out. Working people
they regret it now,
out,
I can tell you.
Not because of globalization, but because of immigration. And if you want to blame somebody, and if you are very angry, may I suggest to Remainiacs that you ask Monsieur Juncker to resign, because if he had given Mr. Cameron the emergency brake on migration that he asked for, we would still be shackled to the dead weight of the European Union. Thankfully, we are out. We are a free nation state. We will continue.
Well, that's all very well for you to say for where you're an immigrant in New York yourself and not actually living in the country.
We're going to have to leave it there.
Isn't immigration fabulous?
Louise Mensch, I want to thank you for joining us from New York City. I want to thank as well Steve Keen in London, Alex Taylor, Jeremy Stubbs. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there. I feel like I should have been strapping on my boxing gloves coming in here.
Well, it seems as though the boxing gloves are also at Westminster.
Definitely. I think the words political turmoil don't really cut it today. It is a seething cauldron out there. And I know that you're not a fan of any more words that end in the word exit, but one has been created, and it does seem to be gathering some steam, the Borexit. And it was actually created some time ago.
Hard to say. Say it again.
Well, I'm going with Borexit.
Borexit.
Because it is, of course, the exit of Boris Johnson. Now, this particular image was created back in May by people who felt that if the UK voted to remain, that he should leave.
Sort of a tribute to David Bowie.
It is rather. Quite scary, too. Looking at the cartoons that have been created today, you've got Boris Johnson here being cut from the zip wire by Theresa May and Michael Gove. Many people feeling that he has definitely been... well, I suppose if you live by the sword, you die by the sword, you could say. Lots of people poking fun at what has happened today. Boris Johnson executes his meticulously planned political strategy because a lot of people feel he's trashed it all, now he's cutting and running. Looking at some of the other memes that we've got, Boris Johnson, when he realised the level of responsibility to lead Britain post-Brexit, he's disappearing into the hedge. And this one as well, the best representation of Boris Johnson I've seen yet, runs into the room, looks terrified and runs away again.
It's exactly that.
It is. I mean, it is funny because it does appear to be
Now,
true.
here's the thing. I heard some in the newsroom, some second guessing and even some third guessing, you might call it. Some people saying, well, he's not running now, but actually maybe this isn't really goodbye.
It's interesting you should say that because a couple of the tweets that I've picked out today, Dimi Rader had this to say: now that we've stopped laughing, Boris isn't abandoning his plan to become the Prime Minister, he's skipping a turn. Next Prime Minister will have the worst job since 1945. He goes on to say, Boris can come skipping back like the world's jolliest pyromaniac and either take credit for what's happened post-Brexit or vow to fix it all.
Jeremy Stubbs, it's true that because they haven't started the clock on leaving the European Union. It's going to be a tough assignment for the next Prime Minister. Do you buy that argument that maybe he's just sitting it out and waiting for the dust to settle?
I'm afraid he will wait a very long time, in fact, until the end of time. We will not see him in a leading role in politics, I think, ever again. He is discredited totally. But I'm actually sure that Theresa May has got the nerves of steel that are necessary for this job.
It's interesting because not that many people are talking about Theresa May right now. If we take a look at The Guardian, they are very much looking at Michael Gove's role in this, saying that his words today have been the killer blow, not just to Boris Johnson's pretensions right now, i.e. his desire to be the Prime Minister, but to any potential political future that he could have had. The words that are highlighted here: Boris cannot provide the leadership or build the team for the task ahead. Now, they say that for Johnson to be abandoned by the guarantor of his candidacy, and at this particular stage, the very last moment, it is the worst setback he has ever suffered in his political career.
And it's interesting the way this battle is playing out, and we saw it in a bit in the debate. The Conservative Party went through a rough patch when Ian Duncan Smith was the leader, and it was felt that it was too ideological at the time. Are we going to have the same problems in the Conservative Party that we're now seeing it for all to see inside the Labour Party?
I think that the big problem in British politics is the centre. Nobody is occupying the centre at the moment. I think the Tory party, it's true, are going to are forced now to go off onto the Leave side. And there's a huge vacuum in the middle, and that's the real problem. But I think that's where the next election is going to be won.
Just one very final word on this. I think this was probably one of my favourite reactions all day to the announcement that Boris Johnson would not be running. You can just see in the background there, that is actually a Times journalist having just come out of the briefing, looking a little startled, to say the least. I think many share his feelings.
All right. Many thanks for that, Emma James. A conversation to be continued, a battle to be continued on both sides of the aisle. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.